Hey everyone, I'm Epion, and today we are doing a deck tech for my Alesha Who Smiles at Death deck. She's a really fun little, pseudo reanimator. Lets you return all your little guys to the battlefield attacking. So I kind of based mine around having a lot of little value guys that, didn't bother me if they died. Because the more times I reanimate them, the more value I get. Otherwise, we just have some guys that are just awful to deal with once they get on the battlefield and can just be annoying, for some of the bigger decks. So we'll just start in our white spells, we'll go straight across, and we'll finish up with the lands. So starting off first is Reconnaissance. If you didn't know about this card, it's obviously amazing with Alesha because you can attack, reanimate, and then remove her from combat. So you still have the ability to attack into larger creatures as long as you have Reconnaissance out. Then we have Swords to Plowshares, obviously a great 1-mana removal spell, allows us to clear the way for Alesha. And most of the time the life gain is actually pretty irrelevant. So, just being able to exile target creature at instant speed for 1 mana is huge. Next we've got Blind Obedience. This is a nice way to sort of tap our opponents for a little bit of life every time we cast a spell, but mainly the enemy artifacts and creatures entering the battlefield tapped is great for us because we want to be able to get in uncontested as often as possible. Obviously, we're playing a deck of all sort of weenie creatures, so the longer the game goes, the less it favors us, and it's going to start favoring more of those mid-range and control decks. So we want to have a way to try and clear the way if they're playing early creatures. Next we've got Spirit Bond. Obviously this is another way to get some value out of our creatures returning to the battlefield. Basically you can reanimate one, pay an extra 1 mana to get a 1/1 Spirit, which we can just use for attacking. But also, we have the ability to sacrifice our spirits to get things indestructible, which is another nice way to protect Alesha when we're attacking. Next, we've got Stoneforge Mystic. We have a couple little equipments in here, so it allows us to search those out pretty efficiently. And normally, when our opponents see Stoneforge Mystic, sometimes that tilts them a little bit. They get real worried about what type of stuff we're going to be pulling out of our deck. They want to try and clear Stoneforge as fast as possible. Next, we've got Valorous Stance. This is a nice new card that allows us to protect Alesha and also allows us to kill creatures that conveniently don't die to her in combat. So this is sort of a nice set of versatile effects, that we may need. Next is War Priest of Thune. Just a nice way to be able to deal with enchantments. Even if they don't have enchantments, at worst he's just a bear. You're paying 2 mana for a 2/2. But at best you may be able to get some value and still get your bear. Then we have Retribution of the Meek. Obviously another card that combos very nicely with all of our creatures because we don't play any creatures that naturally have a power of 4 or greater. And on top of that, they can't be regenerated. So it really helps deal with some of those larger creatures. And our opponents can't give them regenerate. Next we have Fiend Hunter. Nice little bit of soft removal. He does combo obviously nicely with sacrifice creature like Bloodflow Connoisseur because he still has the old verbiage in terms of exiling creatures and returning them to the battlefield. So you still have the ability to sacrifice Fiend Hunter with his first ability on the stack to permanently exile a creature. Which can obviously be huge, being able to just permanently exile big creatures. Next we've got Fell the Mighty. This is a nice pseudo reprint of of our Retribution of the Meek. Obviously it costs more, but we can also play it for lower values, so we can always use it on one of our 1/1s to be able to basically clear the board off. Next we've got Karmic Guide, which obviously allows us to get some extra value. We can reanimate Karmic Guide, and then she can reanimate another creature for us. And the nice part about this is that that creature doesn't have to be attacking, so we can take out things like Kiki Jiki without having to worry about them just immediately dying in combat. Also, because she has Echo, that means she's going to be going to the graveyard very regularly, so we get a lot of uses out of our Karmic Guide. Then we've got Austere Command. This is one of our larger pieces of removal. It does allow us to wrath the entire board, wrath problem artifacts or enchantments, but it also allows us to kill, again, those creatures with a bigger mana cost, which typically have bigger power, bigger toughness than what we would want. And finally, Palisade Giant. This is one of the cards that if you can get it in the graveyard and reanimate it for 2 mana, it's just amazing to have, 7 toughness that's just going to soak up all the damage for you until they can find a way to kill it outright. So this is obviously a nice little bit of... it's basically like giving yourself 7 extra health, which can be huge. Next for our black cards, we've got Vampiric Tutor. Obviously a 1-mana tutor, 2 life. This can be huge for us. It allows us to search for any of our little value creatures or a piece that would allow us to facilitate our reanimating or search for something like Buried Alive. So obviously great value there. Then Go for the Throat, another nice piece of cheap instant speed removal. And normally artifact creatures aren't a huge issue. You know, they make up a much smaller portion of the creature pool than any one color. So this tends to be a lot more versatile than something like, say, Doomblade. Then obviously we have Night's Whisper. We want to have the ability to draw cards because we are playing little weenie creatures. Against some of the slower decks, we may just need to go with an Overwhelm strategy. And so paying 2 mana to draw 2 cards can obviously be nice. Next we have Ravenous Rats. A nice way to go on the attack against some of our slower opponents. We can, make them discard, let this guy die, reanimate him, snag another card. Vampire Hexmage, another first striker. Another great piece of utility because you have the ability to sacrifice Vampire Hexmage to remove all counters from target permanent. In case you didn't know, that also includes Planeswalkers, so she can be a silver bullet for killing Planeswalkers, which is very nice. Then we have Bloodflow Connoisseur. Basically a nice creature to allow us to put creatures that we reanimate back into our graveyard so that we can keep reanimating them. Also combos nicely with some of our creatures that want to die to get effects. Those are mostly in our red portion. Next we have Dark Imposter. This is sort of our attempt of going over the top against some decks. Obviously 3 mana for a 2/2 is not very good, but he does have the added ability of that 6 mana exile target creature, which allows us to just deal with larger threats, assuming the game goes very long. Next we have Attrition. This is another way to help us get creatures into our graveyard and deal with problem creatures, obviously, that aren't black. Next we've got Big Game Hunter, another value creature that we want to be able to reanimate to deal with larger creatures that are in our way. Next we've got Blind Zealot, 3 mana for a 2/2, but with Intimidate, obviously that means that she's probably going to be getting in a pretty fair amount of the time, and her added ability to destroy creatures means we can get in, deal some damage, sacrifice her so she goes back into the graveyard, destroy their creature, and then we can do it again on the next turn. So a nice bit of reusable removal. Next we've got Brainweevil, another card with Intimidate. This guy is mostly in here though so that we can make players discard. So obviously Brainweevil isn't great during combat. However, a lot of people will typically ignore Brainweevil in favor of killing something that's better value or so they can take less damage. So his ability to make them discard 2 cards is still relevant a lot of the time. Disciple of Bolas is a great little way to put creatures into our graveyard, gain us some life, and more importantly, draw cards. So it's sort of a twofold effect, putting somebody back in our graveyard and drawing us some cards. Next we've got Falkenrath Noble. A nice little 2/2 flyer with the ability to reanimate, and it allows us to sort of drain our opponent with the creatures that are undoubtedly going to be dying through combat. So it's a nice way to get us a little bit of incremental life loss, a little bit of incremental life gain, and a lot of the time this guy just ends up getting in for his 2 damage if they don't have a way to block flying. Next we've got King Makar, the Gold Cursed. Obviously this guy is kind of nice because if you reanimate him and they don't kill him, he's going to get to untap, exile a creature, and you still get the piece of gold. So he can be a nice piece of reusable removal at that point. And he can snowball a game pretty fast if they don't have an efficient way to deal with him, because for instance you could attack, they could have no creatures to block, they could play a creature, and when he untaps, he gets to eat it still. So a nice piece of versatile removal there as well. Pontiff is a lot along the same lines as Palisade Giants. One thing that is nice about this one, though, is that it has Extort and all of your other creatures have Extort. So since we're playing a lot of weenie creatures, this means that in the long game we can play a weenie creature or a weenie spell and then extort with all of our creatures for damage for the turn as opposed to attacking. So this gives us a nice alternate way to try and finish out a game, especially if it's getting close and combat's not going favorably for us anymore. Next we've got Faithless Looting. A nice way to put creatures into your graveyard, which is obviously ideal with Alesha. You know, some of these creatures you don't really want to be hard casting. Palisade Giant, Pontiff of Blight. They're just not great to be hard casting. You'd rather reanimate them for 2 mana. And we have Gamble. This is a lot along the same lines as Vampiric Tutor. You can search out a card that you may need, and if it gets discarded, oh well. One thing that is nice about this is obviously if it's your last card in hand, you can search for whatever you want and immediately put it into your graveyard. So it can act like a Entomb if you're down to 1 or even 2 cards in hand. Mizzium Mortis is just a nice piece of spot removal with the ability to overload to try and clear the board, especially if we're attacking. Mogg War Marshal, another creature with Echo. Basically, he gives us a token, he attacks, if he dies we get 1 more, if he gets in there, we're probably not paying for the Echo so that we can reanimate him to get 2 more goblins. So a nice piece of value. Next we have Shivan Harvest, another good way to sacrifice our creatures, and it's a good way to punish players that are using non-basic lands to really smooth out their mana. This card tends to be especially nice against slower control decks that are playing 2 or 3 colors. That goblin is having just a terrible time there. He's getting harvested, I'll tell you that much. I don't know what this... Oh, I don't know what this is back here, though. That's weird. Anyways, we've got Shrieking Mogg. This is another one of those creatures that you don't really ever want to play from your hand. You would rather reanimate it. At that point, you're already attacking, so it's okay if everything gets tapped. The nice thing about this, too, is it comes in during your attack step, which means your opponent doesn't have the ability to declare blockers before all the creatures are tapped. So it's a nice way to get your whole team in uncontested. Stink Scourger, this is another value creature along the same lines as Mogg War Marshal. He's going to get reanimated, clear a blocker out of the way. We're going to not pay for his Echo so that we can do it again during the next turn. Tormenting Voice, and this is the Ujin version. 2 mana, allows us to draw 2 cards, which is something we want to be doing, as well as discarding a card, which is something we also want to be doing. So while on the surface it doesn't look like great value, pay 2 mana, discard a card to draw 2 cards, you're basically paying 2 mana to draw 1 card at sorcery speed. Why would you want to do that? But for us, it allows us to put a guy in the graveyard and then get 2 new guys into our hand, potentially. Next we have Chaos Warp. This card can sometimes go very poorly for, you know, a deck like ours that wants to be playing a lot of weenie creatures and have combat go favorably. Sometimes you'll shuffle something away and get something even worse. But it is a nice way to deal with any type of permanent at least temporarily. Next we have Goblin Rabble Master. If you never got a chance to play with this guy in Standard, he's a lot of fun, pumping out those tokens every turn, and he can get out of hand really quickly, so being able to reanimate him for 2 mana, get in there, and then on your next turn, get another Goblin. You know, it can just be a lot of really good value. Next we have Wheel of Fortune. A great way to refill our hand for 3 mana. This is also a great way to really disrupt slower decks, because they'll typically sit on a lot of cards in hand, and then you can punish them for holding a hand that they may really like, and it allows us to put all of our dudes in the graveyard, get 7 new dudes, and now they're in reset mode trying to figure out what to do. Avalanche Riders. This is a guy that, lets you Stone Rain your opponent. If he dies in combat, great, reanimate him next turn. If he doesn't, you don't pay the Echo, you get to Stone Rain your opponent again. Part of this deck is Resource Denial, and while that's unfavorable a lot of the time on Magic Online, a lot of people will concede to Resource Denial like Land Destruction. This is incredibly good value, especially with Kiki-Jiki or Alesha. Next we have Goblin Settler. Another card that, along the same vein as Avalanche Riders, it allows us to deny resources by destroying lands. This one doesn't have the obvious same plus of being a 2/2, and it can't kill itself off. It also, just this one you sometimes don't want to reanimate nearly as much as this guy, because obviously you're getting a 2/2 with haste for the same mana and still destroying a land. This one you're getting non-haste, 4 mana, 1/1. Reanimating though, they're basically the same card. Mindclaw Shaman. This card can be a little swingy. Basically it allows you to peek at your opponent's hand and see if they have anything that you want to play. This guy can sometimes be great for stealing a draw spell or a piece of targeted removal. So sometimes you get some really good value off of him, which is not too shabby. I also had somebody play this against me when I was playing Alesha, and the only card in my hand was Wheel of Fortune, which they ended up casting anyhow, so they gave me a full hand for free. So he can definitely be cool. And of course we have Kiki-Jiki, the king of Enter the Battlefield value. I mean, what else is there to say about it? He combos incredibly nicely with just about every other creature in this deck. Next, for our multicolor creatures, we've got the High Priest of Penance. This was another card that people were really excited for when it very first got spoiled, but then it ended up not seeing any play anywhere. It turns out that it's actually kind of hard to get this guy to deal damage, to be dealt damage, unless you have a way to do it yourself. Most of the time he gets through for 1 damage, nobody will block him. You know, this guy just ends up not doing much of anything a lot of the time. Mortify, another nice piece of removal, allows you to deal with enchantments or creatures at instant speed. This guy is having an absolutely bad day. Next we have Necrotic Sliver. If you've never played with this card in a Reanimator deck, you are missing out, because it turns out that for 3 mana, to sacrifice and destroy target permanent, especially in a deck that has recursion, this guy is amazing. Destroys lands, destroys planeswalkers, artifacts, enchantments, creatures, anything. It's one of the most versatile pieces of removal in the entire deck. No coincidence that it's white, black, and 1, which was also Vindicate. Next we have Sin Collector, and I especially went and got the creepy, super creepy version of Sin Collector, because why not, right? I mean, if this guy is going to be digging around and looking through your sins, why not have this creepy guy do it? So again, another way to peek at your opponent's hand and exile a problematic, instant or sorcery in that guy's hand. If you've watched my Alesha deck versus Carador, I actually managed to snag a Life of the Loam from our opponent's hand using this, and it basically disrupted all the rest of his land drops because he was counting on returning those lands from his graveyard. So definitely a card that can punish decks that need those value cards like that. Next we have Dreadbore. I went back and forth between Dreadbore and Terminate here. Terminate obviously being an instant, but Dreadbore allows us to deal with Planeswalkers. It seemed like with a really aggressive deck like this, we would want to have ways to deal with Planeswalkers as well, so that we can just keep attacking our opponent's face instead. So I opted for Dreadbore instead. Next we have Kolaghan's Command. Just a very versatile card from one of our new Dragon sets. It allows us to get a value creature back at instant speed, especially something like an Exile effect on graveyards is getting ready to happen. It also allows us to attack our opponent's hand. That goes back to that resource denial. Destroying an artifact. This can be great if you snag something like a Soul Ring or Mana Crypt that your opponent is relying on. And it also deals 2 damage to a creature or player, which can allow you to clear the way during combat. So just a very versatile card. Next we have Murderous Redcap. A nice little bit of damage, pseudo removal. One thing that is sort of annoying with him is that obviously he has Persist, which allows you to get that second little bit of damage in. However, it comes at the cost of this guy has to die twice, technically, before you can reanimate him, which can sometimes be really annoying. And lastly, Master of Cruelties. This guy is really fun to reanimate because obviously it gets around his rules text of he can only attack alone. Since you're not actually declaring him as an attacker, you have the ability to reanimate him and get in there with him as well as your commander, and then it makes it very difficult for them to not block Master of Cruelties, obviously not wanting to get knocked to 1 life. And last of these multicolored creatures is Ponyback Brigade. I don't know if you've heard before, but paying 2 mana to get a 2/2 Ponyback Brigade as well as 3 1/1 goblins is pretty good value. You can also bluff this guy by playing him face down and just attacking that way and trying to get your opponent to kill it so you can put it in the graveyard. It's actually kind of a fun little trick if you do it like that. You can sort of play some mind games because they're constantly worrying what your morph card is. So moving on, this is the last little bit rounding out the deck. These are our artifacts and then obviously our lands. We have Mana Crypt, so we can try and get those more explosive starts. Obviously, it gets no better than turn 1 red source, like a mountain or Badlands, a plateau, and Mana Crypt, so you can get Alesha out turn 1. Basilisk Collar combos very well with Alesha. First Strike and Death Touch is huge. The lifelink usually ends up not being much of a deal. Then we have Skull Clamp. Obviously, in a deck where we want a lot of our creatures to be dying, this gives us just extra value out of that. Also, because a lot of our cards make 1/1 tokens, it allows us to just clamp them just to draw more cards. And obviously Soul Ring, huge part of a lot of commander decks, gives us that early mana. Lightning Greaves, I left Swiftfoot Boots out of this one because it has that 1 cost to equip. So ideally, if we have Lightning Greaves, we'd like to play them turn 2 and then immediately put them onto Alesha, so we don't have that awkward period where you have to worry about her for 1 turn. Next, we have the Orzhov Signet. This is the only Signet that we put in the deck. Its main purpose for being in here, though, is that for 1 mana, we can make the black and the white necessary to reanimate with her ability. So it's a nice little piece of ramp, sort of, but it also allows us to always kind of have that mana open to us. Next we have Burnished Heart. Just a little value creature that, you know, if you have the ability to sacrifice him, you just get 2 lands straight onto the battlefield, kills itself, you can reanimate it, get more lands. So it can be a nice way to find more lands and get you ramped up a little bit. Sometimes this cost of playing Alesha's ability can be sort of cumbersome because it means that you have to play 2 mana behind every turn as long as you're attacking. So that can be a nice way to help smooth that out. In terms of equipment we can find with Stoneforge, we have Sword of Fire and Ice, which helps us protect ourselves from red decks and blue decks. Also gives us a draw engine and a way to kill any creatures that didn't block during combat. After that, we have Sword of Light and Shadow. This allows us to dodge primarily removal from things like Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, Go for the Throat, the various white and black removal. Normally, we're not going to be doing a lot of returning of creature cards from the graveyard to our hand because we would rather use Alesha to get them directly on the battlefield, but sometimes the life gain is relevant. And also we have Tenza Goto's Maul. This card is huge for any red legendary commander. Being able to equip for 1 and give +3/+3 in trample is just amazing. This card, if you've never gotten a chance to play with it, is a ton of fun as long as you have a red commander. And lastly, our last two value creatures. As far as value creatures are concerned, it's hard to beat Solemn Simulacrum. Gets you a land, and when he dies, he gets you a card. 2 power, which allows us to keep reanimating him, and he's got just enough power to be annoying to people that you're attacking, which is also nice. And lastly, Triskelion, nice little way to get around that 2 power portion of Alesha's ability because he's only a 1/1, and then when he enters the battlefield, he gets his 3 counters, so you get a 4/4 for 2 mana. You also can take his counters off to just shoot everything. It can be nice to do that sometimes after combat, so you have a way to kill him off as well. And lastly, of course, we have our lands. I just sort of broke these down into our color combinations. So we've got Badlands, obviously, Blood Crypt, Dragon Skull Summit, Sulphurous Springs, Talus, Temple of Malice, which enters the battlefield tapped. That's not ideal for us. Most of the lands in the deck are going to enter untapped because we want to be very aggressive. But the Scry ability is nice to have as well as a dual land. And since most of our deck is black or black intensive, we have more black sources here. You'll notice that of our white portion, we don't have a lot of double symbols, really. There's only a few that we would really be hard casting that are double. So I actually cut down the number of white sources considerably, especially because we have access. Come on, there you go. We have access to all of these as double dual lands for white sources and these. So we're running Scrubland, Godless Shrine, Isolated Chapel, Caves of Koilos, and again, Temple of Silence. Not ideal because it enters the battlefield tapped, but it does give us that Scry ability, and then 2 normal planes. Finally, in terms of red and white, we have Plateau, Sacred Foundry, Clifftop Retreat, Temple of Triumph, again, not ideal because of the entering the battlefield tapped, but again, we get to Scry. I'm not playing the Pain land for red and white. When I looked over the deck, it didn't feel like it was worth it in terms of making those 2 colors because they're not as color intensive for white and red. And then we have 5 mountains. Last are our bit of utility cards. We have some fetches, Wooded Foothills, Bloodstained Mire, Flooded Strand, and Polluted Delta. That just helps us thin out our deck. We obviously want to be fetching lands out so that we're not drawing lands, we're drawing action instead. Cavern of Souls is obviously great with Alesha. We want to make sure that she sticks when we cast her. Command Tower is great because it gives us all of our colors. Nomad Outpost, obviously not ideal because of the entering the battlefield tapped, but again, it does give us all of our colors. So if this comes down early, we don't typically mind it. And last, Rogue's Passage. This is another good way to get Alesha in without having to worry about her dying in combat. Obviously, Rogue's Passage and Alesha's ability means you have to commit 6 mana every turn just to attacking and reanimating, which can be pretty hefty. So that's not always the best play. This also does come in handy late game when you just have to try and get in for that last little bit of damage. So you can put on something like Tenza or either of the swords and then be able to get in just for straight damage, and that can sometimes be better. Anyhow, this is my Alesha Who Smiles at Death deck. I hope you like it. Let me know what you think of this deck in the comments. This was one of the longer deck techs. Took a long time to get through this one. So let me know what you think of this deck, and leave it in the comments below. Let me know if you see anything that you think may, be interesting to throw in here. And of course, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. But until next time, this is Epion, signing off.